right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. And thank you once again for joining us for our monthly Checkbox webinar. It's a pleasure to see you all and meet you. My name is Min. I am the customer success lead here at Checkbox. And what that means is I get to really be on the ground working with our customers around building out their automation projects. I get to see sort of patterns in the way that our customers set up their environment and the type of stakeholders that they bring into the picture. So I'm really excited to share with you today what it's going to take to assemble the right team for your automation project. And so hopefully off the back of this, you'll have a better sense of what's worked and what doesn't work. And if you're sort of missing certain elements, you can use that to obviously apply it to your projects. And obviously, if you've already got everything set up, then you can give yourself a pat on the back and say that you're sort of on track to completing your automation project. Super excited. So in today's session, what we're going to do is going to cover a couple of different things. So the first thing that we are going to cover is sort of the factors or the drivers for what we're looking for in people. So I'll kind of share that first. And then I'll talk about the specific roles that you want per automation project, what you want to be looking out for. And I'll also cover some sort of auxiliary or peri roles that are also really important to have as part of your automation project. And then I'll sort of finish off by with some Q&A as well as sort of an insight into the next webinar as well. Now, as always, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A button down below, I believe, or wherever your Zoom panel is. Feel free to click on that and submit your questions at any time. I'll try to get around to answer them with the time that we have left. And if I don't get around to answering your questions, I will endeavor to send out in the email that follows the webinar answers to your questions. So look for that. Cool. So I think I want to preface by saying that a lot of the time when people start with their automation projects, there's a lot of hype, a lot of interest in wanting to jump right into just really developing and really getting on board and building out, let's say, an automation project. And that's great. Harnessing that is really important. But often what you find is that something feels off after a while. After a while, momentum sort of dies down. You feel like you haven't involved the right people. There's sort of, end users and decision makers who kind of, say, hey, why weren't we involved in from the beginning of the process? So hopefully from this webinar, you'll get some sense of who you need to involve to assemble the right team for your automation project. Cool. So let's kick off. The first thing I want to cover with you, spelling mistake there, but what are the effective automation drivers that we're looking for in people? What characteristics mark the people that are really going to successfully drive your automation projects? So I want to cover three axes here. The first one is interest. Okay, so for the most part, most people are quite interested in automation projects. They see new technology or they hear about improvements, they're feeling the pain. Interest is always something that you're going to want to have at a baseline, and for all things considered, for the obvious thing for here to say is for those who aren't interested, you definitely want to be mindful of people who aren't interested, and in particular, mindful of people who are what we call anti-champions, or people who are really against new technology. And the thing here is to be mindful not to continue to allow them to harness that sort of either resentment or resistance against change, but to really bring them along the journey and articulate the benefits for them. So interest is really, really key, and that intangible sort of vibe and positive momentum that you want to be finding in all the people that you're involved with. The second axis that you want to be considering is capability, in particular technical capability or perhaps domain expertise capability. You're going to want to have someone who knows what they are talking about. It's really important that, what I've seen often is you'll find people that are interested and perhaps might have the time, but might not necessarily have the capability to either provide knowledge, the base knowledge for your automation project, or may not have, for instance, the technical capability to carry out that particular project. So if that's the case, it may be worth actually leaving them in the interest category. There is a role for people who are interested, but not necessarily have all the capabilities to help drive the project. And I will cover that towards the end, but it's something to be look out for. It's also worth noting that capability is sort of hard to measure on a quantitative scale, but one thing you should be looking out for is experience. So people who have had experience implementing technology projects or having done automation projects, or are keen learners and can pick new things up really quickly, These are all things that I would be considering as contributors to sort of that capability realm. The third thing is capacity. So this one is not talked about a lot, and it seems obvious, but you'd be surprised at the number of people that we come across who are, really keen and interested in automation, are clearly technically capable and can build out, new processes and new projects, but perhaps don't have the capacity. In fact, one of the challenges that you may or may not have already faced, or if you haven't already, you will definitely face in the future, is how to enable people who are, interested and technically capable to set aside a portion, let's say 20 to 30% of their week-to-week capacity to dedicate towards automation projects. The reality is most organizations are not set up from a strategic perspective to enable their workforce to dedicate time to innovation projects. And so that is something to consider, especially if you are a decision maker or if you are someone who is managing a team. In order for you to enable your team to really thrive in automation, you're going to need to probably mandate some time or a percentage of the capacity of your team to dedicate weekly to automation projects. And we would recommend in the initial instance, if you want any sort of effective change, even something, the minimum bar really is something like 2 hours. If you can carve out 2 hours of someone's week to say, hey, we want you to put a pause on, stuff. We want you to focus on innovation projects. You have a chance to actually make a difference. Obviously, the more, time you allocate and the more that grows, the more you'll be able to make an impact. So it's really important to consider that, because I think a lot of people come into projects with interesting capability, but not necessarily the capacity side of things. And now that we have all three circles, I also want to address there are people who are interested and have the capacity, but may not necessarily have the capability. So you have to sort of assess these things as you are sort of project managing and getting ready to set up your particular innovation project. Obviously, the ideal here is for us to be somewhere in the middle. You want to involve people who are interested, you want to involve people who are capable, and you want to involve people who have capacity. So if you're able to do that and find those people that you want to hold on to them, you want to bring them in and nurture them as much as possible and bring them along that journey. So I want to put that sort of 3 axes on the table first, because then all the different roles that come after this will make a lot more sense. And I'll explain sort of how these 3 axes play into those specific roles. But the obvious question now, from after we've sort of assessed the effective drivers, are what are the key roles in automation projects? Who else, who do we need to enable your automation projects to succeed? Is it simply the builder of the tool? Is it the person who knows the process? Is it a senior decision maker? Who is it that really we need to form the ingredients of a successful automation project? So let me go through them sort of sequentially here. So the first one is you're going to need champions. Now, champions are people who actively promote innovation projects within your organization. In fact, if you're joining this webinar, there's a good chance that you probably are a champion. You or someone that is responsible for promoting and raising awareness about activities in the innovation space within your team or organization. And the type of characteristics that we're looking for in a champion are they have some level of influence in the organization. So either by seniority or by sort of their technical skill or by tenure. Influence is really important because these people are going to go out and sell, quote unquote, sell the idea of what your automation project can bring in terms of change. The second sort of characteristic that we find is that they tend to be quite great people persons or people. I don't even know how to say that because it's the two anyway. They're great people or people persons, and they can organize project teams really well. So they know who to grab, they know who to chat to. They have friendly connections across the organization. They can build bridges between functions. There's just a really nice way that they work, which is through collaboration. So typically champions are really great at doing that. And as a bonus, if you've found someone who is really already actively promoting innovation projects and raising awareness, which may be yourself, chances are they're usually hands-on with the technology. Now, this isn't always the case, but typically champions are the first ones to foray into new endeavors. So if a new technology is procured, or you find that you're going on a trial to try new technology out, they're usually the ones who jump on board and really make that assessment for themselves. And so if they are able to be hands-on, that is probably the most ideal situation. So how do you find it engaging? Well, let me tell you something. Champions are they are either really grown or really mandated. So champions are one of those things that they really have an affinity for new innovation. They really have an affinity for raising awareness. They have a real affinity for change. And often you either have them or you really need for them to be elected by senior stakeholders to drive innovation internally. So either they're going to be homegrown, organic, sort of bottom up people who've raised their hands and they're really keen to see change, or they're going to have been appointed by some decision maker to say, hey, I need you to really drive the success of this particular automation project or projects within our organization. And what goes along with that is obviously, my allusion back to the three rings that I showed you on the previous slide, which is, are they inherently interested in the automation project? Are they inherently, capable? Can they actually potentially support and implement if they need to? And lastly, probably the most important one is the capacity. Do they have time to actually commit to this? Or are they really more just interest and capability? Really important to consider these things. And one way you can also engage these people is to find ways to sort of have KPI incentives, right? How do you reward innovative behavior? It's to bake it into sort of your performance review. So one of the more innovative ways we've seen this applied across the organization is to do things like reward innovative behavioral activity. So as part of maybe your quarterly or what do you call biannual review, you then say, okay, what did we actually do that drove innovation this quarter or in the last 6 months, and can we measure it? And let's put that to the table. What impact did that make for the business? So really important to find these champions. Cool. The second role is subject matter experts. Now, this one's pretty obvious. You're going to need someone to provide the base context around your particular innovation project. You're going to need them to also provide feedback throughout the delivery lifecycle. So they're the ones who are going to give you a sense of what's working, what's not working, if you need to pivot, has exceptions been considered. And the last one is they're typically the end user or conduits for feedback from end users. So likely they're the ones who are going to be coordinating with your end users and getting their feedback and saying, hey, actually, the tool could be improved in XYZ way, or this is really good, we should emphasize this particular point, ABC. They have a really good pulse on how the end users are going to respond to your project. So on top of obviously providing the knowledge and the expertise, they are really good for connecting with end users. So what are their characteristics? They're typically an expert or some specialized knowledge, a person within your organization or a key point of contact for a given process. If we consider sort of process being the kind of starting point for innovation, they're typically the ones that are going to be able to provide you that content. And they're really everywhere. So I couldn't tell you exactly which department they fall under. You'll typically find experts all across the organization. Now, it is a bonus if this particular person has implemented a technology project or is familiar with the technology that you're looking to implement your automation project in. This is really important. Not really important, but it's nice to have, because then they sort of know the boundaries of what is possible, what is perhaps not possible. So the more that they're aware of that particular sort of grade or scope, the better that they can help you form the end result. So how do you find and engage them? Well, as I mentioned, there's no real one spot or team that really harbors subject matter experts. They're all everywhere across the organization. But the best way to find people who are interested, capable, and have the capacity is to do things like raise awareness with internal demos. So you might do a team-based demo of your technology and kind of share some use cases. You might do roadshows if you've already built out certain projects. So you might say, hey, let's take some segment of people within our legal team, for instance, or our procurement team, or our client-facing team, and let's do a small demo or roadshow, interviews or one-on-one sessions. The reality is SMEs are everywhere, and as long as you can continue to raise awareness about what is possible, then you'll find, naturally there will be interest that grows out of across the business. So raising awareness is really, really important. The last one is around. Just click here, technologists. So we've covered the champions who are going to really raise the internal awareness for you. We've covered the subject matter experts who are going to provide the content, and you're obviously going to need a third group, which is the technologists. These are the people who are going to be building or implementing your project on your given technology. And some really key characteristics are they work well with tech. They've generally had some experience with implementing technology projects. They're not necessarily defined by a specific role type. So we might be inclined to say, oh, that innovation team or that business analyst or that project manager is going to be driving things. But I'd question that. I would actually say that I've met a lot of people across the board. Seniority, it doesn't matter what seniority they are. I've met GCs who've implemented projects on Checkbox before, and I've met paralegals who've implemented on Checkbox. So there is a sort of wide range of seniority and function that can be really effective technologists. So if you've sort of come to the table and said, hey, we need a specific team or persons to be building, I'd second guess that. I'd consider if you could find people outside of just those traditional roles to build for you. The last characteristic is they're typically great learners and can learn new technology really quickly, and they're typically quite detail orientated. So it's really important that that person has a good grasp or can quickly pick up technology as needed. How do you engage them? Well, for technologists, it's really important to look at existing projects. So have they already been involved at some level with implementation across the board? That's probably going to give you the best sense and assessment of their capability. So as soon as you can do that, you're pretty good. The other one is to find people internally who are interested, have capacity, and are technically capable. Again, coming back to those 3 rings that I showed you before, finding those people either within your own team or teams that you work with, or what we call sort of auxiliary or support teams, like operations teams. If you can reach out and say, hey, we're looking for a person who fulfills those 3 criteria, we're trying to embark on this automation project, do you know anyone you can nominate? It's probably the best first step. Cool. So those are the 3 key roles in automation. I really encourage you to look at those 2 roles and go, do we have that for our particular project? What are we missing here? You likely probably already have a subject matter expert, and you likely already have a technologist. They may even be the same person, but the question is, do you have sort of a champion who's going to be leading things internally, just someone who can drive the influence within your organization? Now, there's a couple of other roles that are really important, which I haven't noted because they're not necessarily part of the automation project squad itself, but is important as they sit around, sort of, maybe if you think of a concentric circle, are the layer around that core team that you're definitely going to need, but not necessarily on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis. So the first role is any decision makers. So these people are typically signing off on a project. There might be a 1-up manager, 2-up manager, the SMEs 1-up manager. You need to identify very quickly who is going to be able to sign off on this. And when you implement it, particularly if it's an automation project, you have to consider that change management that's going to be involved. So who on the change management side, or people who are going to be impacted by the change, can we sort of get the authority to sign off on? Characteristics: has your authority to sign off on that particular process, and they're typically the function or team owner. Okay, so I mentioned that before. So decision makers typically we communicate in a couple of different ways. The first one is around articulating ROI. So they're really big on cost versus savings. So particularly for automation projects, you are looking at ways to bring return on investment. So you want to be comparing what is the cost of us implementing this particular project against the savings that it would potentially bring to either the function or the organization. The other way to articulate it, if you don't have those numbers, is to look at pain point versus benefits, a qualitative view of what are the current pain points and what are the benefits that we are able to source out. Now, if you want a better framework or a more detailed framework on how to actually set that up, you can head back to one of our older webinars, which is around how to ideate and validate your automation use cases, which I ran. So a little plug there, but I've got a framework in there that actually goes to that analysis of how to actually set that up. So go ahead and check that one out. The other one for decision makers is to bring them on board early, or at least communicate early. The last thing that you want is to get to the implementation step, or even worse, the deployment of the communication step, and realize that your decision makers haven't been brought along the journey, and realize, oh my gosh, we need to do a whole change management exercise to influence upwards. And that is really, really challenging. So make sure you identify those stakeholders well ahead of time, probably at your ideation step, and get them on board. The second the important role to note here is end users. It seems pretty obvious, but they're going to be the ultimate users of your tool and are going to provide you feedback on the project. And the characteristics are they're probably already engaging a process that the SME has visibility over, and they're coordinating between them exactly what the pain points are, what their frustrations are with the process, or perhaps what they like about the existing process. So you really need to identify those people ahead of time. The challenge here will be to see if you can segment them. Typically, end users are can be as low as couple of people in a team, or as grand or as broad as the rest of the organization. And so the challenge here will be to find out key people in the end user side who can then provide you that level of feedback that is comprehensive enough that you don't have to get feedback from every single person within your organization. How to find and engage them, your SME will know. So work with them. Either they're going to be the users or they're going to know people who are going to be the users. So work through the SME to coordinate that. And again, bring them early on in the journey, identify right at the ideation or scoping stage, and identify benefits for the end user. I think a misconception that a lot of people have when going into automation projects is, oh, when we automate this, this is automatically going to bring value to the end user. The reality is sometimes, benefits and pain points are simply transferred. You may have removed the pain point, but and provided a benefit, but in the same exchange, you may have actually provided another pain point. They're typically interacting with another technology tool. They're not interfacing with a person usually because of automated away that sort of back and forth between human to human. So it's something to consider, and it's really important to concisely and clearly articulate what the benefit is for the end user up front, because that will really help you in with the buy-in process. Awesome. Well, that kind of pretty wraps up the general roles of the automation projects at a high level. And that will take you across the champions. You've got the SMEs, you've got the technologists who are going to really be the core team of your automation project. And then paired to that, you're going to have a group of decision makers and end users that you're going to want to bring along the journey and to make it a success. In my experience, what I've seen is that when you have a strong champion who typically is a technologist as well, combined with the subject matter expert, and then you have the backing of the decision maker and clear end users, 95% of the time, it's going to be a massive success. A question that I typically get asked is, where do things fall down? Or what is something common that you see that falls down for organizations? And I think the biggest part is around end users. So not really clearly defining who your end user is. That's a massive pain point for automation projects. Kind of assuming that the end users are going to be happy with the change, but not clearly articulating that benefit. And the other one is actually bringing on board, surprisingly, the subject matter experts. You might think, well, they're the knowledge experts. Why wouldn't they? Why would there be any issues with bringing them on board? The challenge here is actually around the change management. So when you go from an old process to an automated process, someone needs to make a decision on what that new process is going to be, and that decision to make the call is often not clear. As an example, you might want to standardize your legal agreements for your suppliers, your supply agreements. Who makes the call on that, or what group of people make the call on that, and how is that decision making process defined? Is it by seniority? Is it by democratic vote? What is it? So that is also a challenging part of managing automation projects. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how to set up the people side of things. And if you have any questions around how to actually manage that, I'm more than happy to sort of field that, and also connect with you outside of this webinar to talk through some of perhaps the challenges or potential candidates that you're considering. But looking ahead to the next month's webinar, we're going to be looking at understanding no-code and its role in the enterprise tech stack. So largely today, what we've been looking at is really specific to app development and automation projects, but we're going to be taking more of a strategic lens, looking at a high level exactly how no-code really rolls out in the enterprise. And some of you guys will resonate with that sort of question. And it's discovering how no-code enables IT teams and business users to do more with less. That one's going to be run by Evan Wong, our CEO and co-founder, as well as Matthew Johnson, our senior solutions engineer. And that will happen on the 1st of July, which is a Thursday from 12:30 to 1 p.m. So this particular time slot, but it's not going to be exactly a month from now, given the end of financial year. It'll be the first week of July. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I can't wait to catch you at the next one. So have a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you at the next Checkbox webinar.